The First American Election, Conflict, Strategy. Part 2, The First Presidency. How political rivalries, divided states, and one man's letters shaped the outcome of America's first race for power. When America's first presidential election began, unity was more dream than reality. The Constitution was barely dry, and half the country still doubted it would last. Now, in the second half of this story, political rivals fight to control the outcome, and a handful of letters from Alexander Hamilton quietly shape history. The debate over the Constitution didn't just divide towns or families, it divided state governments too. In some places, that split nearly stopped the presidential election altogether. Nowhere was this more dramatic than in New York. In 1789, the New York State Legislature was locked in a bitter standoff. The upper house, the Senate, was controlled by Federalists who supported the Constitution. The lower house, the Assembly, was controlled by Anti-Federalists who opposed it. The Senate proposed a compromise. Each chamber would choose half of New York's 8 electors. That way, 4 would likely support the Constitution, and 4 might oppose it. But the Assembly refused. They wanted the entire legislature to vote together as one body, which would have given the Anti-Federalists the majority and allowed them to pick all 8 electors. Each side passed its own version of the election bill, only to have it rejected by the other chamber. Weeks of arguing followed. They sent the issue to a conference committee, but no agreement was reached. When January 7th, Election Day, finally arrived, the 2 chambers were still deadlocked. Midnight came and went, and New York failed to appoint any electors at all. Because of that same political gridlock, New York also failed to send any U.S. senators to the First Congress until months later. For a time, one of the most important states in the new nation had no voice in choosing its first president or in shaping its first Senate. A similar conflict nearly unfolded in New Hampshire, where the legislature was also divided. But at the last moment, the Anti-Federalists in the lower house gave in and accepted the Senate's plan. New Hampshire just barely managed to participate in the election, a decision reached, according to some reports, only minutes before the deadline. So what were the Anti-Federalists fighting for? Many of them accepted that the Constitution had been ratified, but they weren't ready to give up. They hoped to call a second constitutional convention that would rewrite or revise the document. At the very least, they wanted to slow down or weaken the new federal government before it gained too much power. Their strategy was simple: elect as many Anti-Federalists as possible to early federal offices. In Congress, they could push for amendments and limit the government's authority. In the Electoral College, they might even disrupt the presidential vote to show the system's flaws. During the ratification debates, Federalists had promised that amendments would be added later to protect individual rights. That promise, made mostly to win support, helped convince several states to approve the Constitution. Eventually, those promises were kept with the adoption of the Bill of Rights in 1791. But in 1789, many Anti-Federalists weren't sure those protections would ever appear. Everyone already knew that George Washington would become the first president. That had been almost certain when the office of president was written into the Constitution. Washington had presided over the Constitutional Convention itself, and even as the delegates debated the powers of the presidency, they all quietly assumed he would be the one to fill the office first. But some Federalists feared that Anti-Federalist electors might try to spoil the outcome. Under the original system, each elector cast 2 votes for president. The candidate with the most votes would become president, and the runner-up would become vice president. The framers hadn't required electors to say which of their 2 votes was meant for which office. This design flaw left room for chaos. Ultimately, this constitutional flaw would be corrected by the 12th Amendment, but in 1789, the existing rules were a formula for mischief. Everyone expected Washington to receive the most votes. But what if Anti-Federalist electors decided to withhold votes from him, or cast extra votes for someone else? If John Adams, Washington's expected second-place finisher, somehow received more votes, he could become president instead, with Washington as vice president. That outcome would have embarrassed the new government and damaged its credibility right from the start. Federalists also worried that the Anti-Federalists might coordinate around another candidate for vice president, such as George Clinton of New York. a well-known critic of the Constitution. If enough electors voted for Washington and Clinton, it could pair a Federalist president with an anti-Federalist vice president. Not an ideal start for unity. The Federalists decided to act. As the Electoral College vote approached, a quiet campaign began to make sure John Adams didn't accidentally surpass Washington in the final count. Leading the effort was Alexander Hamilton, already known for his energy and political skill. He wrote letters across the country to influential figures, urging them to tell their state's electors not to give both of their votes to Washington and Adams. Instead, Hamilton encouraged them to scatter their second votes among other candidates. The plan worked. When the electors met in February 1789, Washington received unanimous support, 69 electoral votes, one from every elector who participated. Adams received 34, comfortably in second place, with the rest spread among a handful of other figures. Some of those scattered votes were part of Hamilton's strategy. In Connecticut, for example, 5 of the state's 7 electors voted for Washington and Adams, while 2 voted for Washington and another local figure, Samuel Huntington. Those votes for Huntington were deliberate, meant to keep Adams' total lower. In Pennsylvania, 2 electors who might have voted for Adams instead supported John Hancock. And in Maryland, only 6 of the state's 8 electors were able to meet because of bad weather and illness. All 6 voted for Washington and Thomas Johnson, another local name chosen for the same balancing purpose. Washington would later appoint Johnson to the Supreme Court. Not all of these alternate votes were purely tactical. Some electors genuinely preferred other candidates for the second slot, such as John Jay or John Rutledge. Washington would later appoint Jay the first Chief Justice and Rutledge an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. But overall, Hamilton's quiet coordination achieved its goal. Washington easily secured the presidency, and Adams became vice president without controversy. Still, the election revealed a major flaw in the system. Having electors vote for 2 candidates without specifying which was for president and which for vice president created confusion and risked unintended results. That weakness would cause even bigger problems in later elections until it was fixed by the 12th Amendment in 1804, which required electors to cast separate votes for each office. When the results were announced, Washington had received every electoral vote cast, the only president in American history ever to do so. John Adams had fewer votes than many expected, and the outcome deeply hurt him. He knew Washington was destined to win, but he hadn't expected to trail by such a wide margin. For Adams, it was a painful reminder that even in victory, politics could be humbling. In the end, though, the new system held together. The Constitution had survived its first major test. In the spring of 1789, George Washington traveled to New York City, then the nation's capital, to take the oath of office as the first president of the United States. John Adams was sworn in to begin his role as vice president 9 days before Washington took the oath as president. Together, they began the work of building a government that, in many ways, still follows the structure those delegates in Philadelphia had written only 2 years before. That first election was more than a contest for power. It set the pattern for everything that followed. It was an experiment, a test of whether a nation built on ideas, rather than royal bloodlines or inherited rule, could actually govern itself. And although much has changed since 1789, every presidential election since then has carried a trace of that same uncertainty, that same hope, and that same question the founders faced in the beginning. Could this bold new system really work? In the end, George Washington took the oath as the first president of the United States, proving that the experiment in self-government could work, at least for now. But every election since has carried echoes of 1789, the struggle between unity and division, between idealism and fear. The story of America's first election isn't just history. It's the beginning of the nation's ongoing argument about what keeping the republic really means. From a fragile experiment to a lasting democracy, the story of 1789 still echoes in every election since. If you'd like to see more stories from America's beginnings, like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to join us to explore the next chapters of constitutional history.